Hello, my name is Spencer and welcome back to my hobby channel. I'm enjoying learning how to paint miniatures, make dioramas, and storytell through them. This is Woodland Scenic's Just Plug lighting system. For a future project, I plan on using this Just Plug system, so I wanted to have an opportunity to practice building this system up for a diorama. This project's inspiration is a little bit different than the other projects I've made. These are two warriors I have from Dungeons & Dragons. Usually my inspiration comes from the figures, but I knew these two female warriors would be able to square off pretty well in an arena, and I thought this lighting system would be a good way to test out lighting around an arena. Before anyone asks, usually I wouldn't recommend putting the batteries into a battery pack before you assemble a project, but I tried to dry fit them into the battery holder, and unfortunately they seem pretty hard to get out, so we're just gonna run with this as is. For the base of the diorama, I'm going to use two picture frames on top of each other. This will allow us to have enough space underneath the terrain to fit the battery case, which is the largest part of the lighting system. Using the nearest cardboard box I had, my partner's Pop-Tarts box, I will create a barrier between the electrical work and the terrain. I was fairly certain that this cardboard was strong enough to form a barrier between the two elements. Firstly, I'll cut my Pop-Tarts box so that I make sure that it will fit on top of my picture frame securely. Then I had to glue the Pop-Tarts lid down on top of the picture frame. I also then had to attach both the picture frames together to create the final base. Next, to work on the podium the fighters will be standing on. For the podium, I used XPS foam. I put our femme fatales on the base and I traced out how large of a square I would need to cut for the podium. Once I have the appropriately sized platform ready to go, I cut it out using my hobby knife. Before I proceed any further, I dry fit both the platform and the miniatures onto the base to make sure I had ample space for everything to go on. Next, I took a piece of crumpled up aluminum foil and I smushed every inch of this XPS foam platform. Ultimately, I want this platform to look like it's made out of rock, and weathered rock at that. By using the aluminum foil, I can texture the XPS foam to look a little bit more realistic and weathered. After a bit of smushing and picking, I ended up getting a result that I was pretty satisfied with. Once we have the platform arena done, we can then glue it to the rest of the base and let that set. While that seals, we can make a terrain paste out of plaster, Mod Podge, and paint. I combined each of the three into a cup and stirred it around until I got a consistency that I was satisfied with. Then, using my gloved hand, I spread it around the entirety of the base, excluding the arena platform where our warriors will be fighting later on. While the terrain hardens, I'll then take this opportunity to clean up my work area a little bit. Once the terrain has hardened, I then applied PVA glue to the entirety of the base, excluding one small area for a path to be formed later on. Then I used a static grass applicator to the entirety of the base so that I could get good coverage on all the areas that were applied with the glue. Then I vacuumed up as much of the excess grass as I could as to not be wasteful with my materials and so that I can use them in future ones. I then used Citadel's Technical Sterling Mud to cover the path and the edges of the platform to create a realistic muddy texture for the base that isn't stone or grass. Then I primed the entirety of the base with a black spray primer I used from my airbrush. I also took this opportunity to prime both of my warriors as well. Then I applied a white zenithal prime from above from my airbrush to the entirety of the base and the miniatures that I had primed black. I actually ended up applying multiple layers of the white zenithal to the arena platform because the Sharpie I had used to mark with the XPS, while it doesn't come through on video, was coming through the primer really well, and I didn't want that to see through the other colors later in the project. I then applied a layer of Mechanicus Standard Gray to the entirety of the arena platform to give it that stone gray color to begin with. For all the areas that will be eventually grass and or dirt, I covered it in a dark brown muddy color. Then I applied a grassy green color to where I want grass to eventually grow onto this diorama. Then, to make the rock textures really shine through on our arena platform, I then applied a black wash to the entirety of it, making sure it doesn't pool too much and making sure it just brings out the highlights. While I wait for the base to dry, I can move to painting our heroes. I started by painting both of their faces using Citadel's Bugman's Glow as a base tone and then highlighting up into a Cadian flesh tone. For painting these two femme fatales, I didn't quite have a plan set out as I began painting them, but a plan kind of appeared. I wanted to test a few new techniques that I've learned, such as painting blonde hair versus brown hair, and trying a few new techniques here and there as I could. For the overall plot of this storyline, I'm thinking more of a warrior culture with two clans feuding against each other. The brunette woman will be from the blue clan, and the blonde woman will be from the red clan. These clans might receive more lore in the future depending on how far I want to take this world, but at this point, I think this will do. In my mind, the conflict between these two individuals is not necessarily personal, it's more ritual. My goal for this diorama was to get a trial by combat theme going on, trying to settle some kind of feud between these two clans, and they chose their most powerful champions to represent them. While I continue to paint these miniatures, I'll let some music play. Like I've said many times before, I'm learning how to paint miniatures and storytell through these dioramas. I've always found in this hobby there's always something to learn, something new to try. So if you see any techniques that I can improve on, or any techniques of your own that you're willing to share, please feel free to leave a comment down below, and I would be more than willing to try them in a future video. Thank you very much for staying to this part of the video, and I just would like you all to know that I appreciate you very much. Once the warriors are done and the base has dried, we can then work to lighting our diorama up. For this diorama, I will be trying to create 2 braziers using the Woodland Scenics Just Plug lighting system. This system includes a battery pack, a light hub, 2 lights, and a switch. To light the duel, I looked for a domed object. I found a ping pong ball and I decided I wanted to try to use this for a brazier on the field. To start, I needed to cut the ping pong ball in half. To do this, I used my hot wire cutter and a glove over my hand because this was getting a little close to my fingers and the hot wire cutter. Once the ping pong ball was cut in half, I then sanded down each half of the ping pong ball so that each half was smoother and had a nicer edge than the melted plastic feeling. For the foundation of the brazier, I used a polystyrene sheet and I cut thin strips of it so that I could wrap them around the circles and then set them on the bottom of the dome. Once I had the appropriate size of a strip of polystyrene cut out, I then secured it in a round circle that would fit the bottom of the dome. I wanted to apply some texture to the base, so I applied a thin layer of liquid green stuff to the entirety of the outsides. Before I continued to assemble, I drilled a hole into the bottom of the braziers so that I could have the electrical wiring go through and make sure that the light fit through the gap as well. Then I can assemble the braziers. Once assembled, I then applied a black primer to the entirety of the braziers. Then I applied a thin layer of Balthazar Gold Citadel color to the entirety of them to give that bronze color. Then I dry fit both the braziers onto the diorama and I made sure it had space, and I drilled holes to make sure the wiring would be able to get through the terrain to the bottom where the electronics will be stored. Then we can thread the wiring through so that the lights will be on top of the diorama, but all the wiring will be hidden beneath the diorama. We can also thread these through the braziers at this point and then affix them down to the rest of the diorama. Once everything has been assembled, we can start looking to make flames for these braziers to light up this diorama. To do this, I'm going to be taking some cotton swabs and ripping them apart. I saw a couple other model channels do this, such as Boy Like Hobby Time, and I really wanted to try it out for my own. Once we have our 2 columns of flame built, I then airbrush them, starting with a yellow, working up to an orange, and then a red color, just to make it look like a lively fire. At the end, I also added some black at the very top for a nice smoke effect. Once the fires have been painted, we can then put them in place inside the braziers, gluing them down with a little drop of glue so that they don't cover up the lights too much. Then, just to spruce up the diorama a little bit, I added some bushes to wherever I saw that there was a slight imperfection or I wanted just to be a little covered up. Once the entire diorama is assembled and painted, we can then move to clipping both of the warriors from their sprues and then putting them onto the diorama. Once everything has dried and the electronics have been properly stowed away, we can then paint the sides black and move to some glamour shots. I'd like to take this moment to say thank you to each of you who've stuck around to this point of the video. I truly appreciate it. I'm really enjoying learning how to pursue my hobbies, and I really enjoy sharing my progress with you all. I'll be back soon with another diorama, another story to tell, and another project. I hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you around.